All right, time for another 49ers update on what was a key day on the NFL calendar here heading into the new league year, which begins next week. It was franchise tag deadline day. So the teams that wanted to franchise tag players had to get it done by this afternoon. No, the 49ers were not one of the teams that franchise tagged the player, but there's a different deadline coming up next week that's a whole lot more relevant to the 49ers. That being said, we cover the whole league here, and some of this stuff does operate within the context of what the 49ers are doing. So we'll borrow a tweet from Albert Breer to summarize the players that received the franchise tag today, and I'll explain a little bit about the impact here and maybe some of the rules in case some of you are interested, since I know some of these terms can confuse some people, especially since today we saw the rare use of the transition tag as well. But first of all, here are the NFL franchise tags used today. These players all signed non-exclusive franchise tags, which is the same one. They didn't sign them. They're tendered non-exclusive franchise tags, the same one that the Baltimore Ravens tendered to Lamar Jackson last year. What that means is that these players do have the opportunity to negotiate with other teams. The salary that's on the table for the 2024 season for them is the average of the top 5 salaries at their respective positions. If another team does outbid whatever the franchise tag is for each respective player, and the team that currently has that player does not want to match another team, then that player can sign with that other team, but the other team will have to also pay 2 first-round draft picks to the team that currently has the player. So there's a good chance that all of these players will stay with their current teams. The Jaguars' Josh Allen, a fine edge rusher, had 17 and a half sacks this year. Another really good edge rusher, Brian Burns, maybe not in Josh Allen's category. He was tagged by the Panthers. The Bengals receiver, T. Higgins, they decided to tag him about a week ago. Bears cornerback Jalen Johnson out of Fresno. The 49ers were interested in Jalen Johnson at the trade deadline. I'm sure they were interested in him leading up to this period of free agency. The fact that he got the tag, though, means that the 49ers would have to give up 2 first-round picks to the Bears to even have a shot at grabbing Jalen Johnson, unless they're able to negotiate a trade of another sort with Chicago. But doesn't look as promising as it might have looked before the trade deadline. That was definitely one that the 49ers were kicking the tires on before they were able to acquire Chase Young. Justin Matabuki, the Ravens defensive tackle, has received the franchise tag. So has Colts wide receiver Michael Pittman. Chiefs cornerback L'Jarius Sneed has received the tag, and very publicly the Chiefs are saying that L'Jarius Sneed is available for a trade if a team could come forward with acceptable offers for a trade. And Buccaneers safety Antoine Winfield, the star of the Super Bowl a few years back, has been franchise tagged. So these players have been in the news today. I know a lot of 49ers fans were hoping that some of these guys, many of these guys, might become available on the unrestricted free agent market. But, you know, even the Panthers, a poorly run team, I think were smart enough to realize you can't just let Brian Burns hit unrestricted free agency for free. You got to protect yourself. You slap that franchise tag on him. He can negotiate with other teams, but it sets a very high price to those other teams to be able to get Brian Burns. First, you have to outbid the tag amount. Then you'd have to send those 2 first-round picks over. The Patriots used the franchise tag for their safety, Kyle Duggar, which is a little bit different than those non-exclusive franchise tags. The transition tag is not used as much, but the offer is for a lower price. It's for the top 10 contracts at the position averaged out instead of the top 5 in the franchise tag. And then there is no draft compensation required in case a team outbids the New England Patriots, who slapped that transition tag on Kyle Duggar. So it's just merely there's a right of first refusal here. The right of first refusal means that if another team outbids the Patriots for Kyle Duggar, the Patriots do have an opportunity to match. But if they decline the match, they're not going to be getting 2 first-round picks. They leave empty-handed. So the Patriots more willing to lose somebody like Kyle Duggar than this group of teams right here is willing to lose these players. Now, as far as the 49ers go, they next week are going to be facing a deadline that has some of the same terminology as this one, but it's not a franchise tag deadline. It is a restricted free agent deadline, the tender deadline for RFAs. Jauaun Jennings is a restricted free agent. He's going to be one once the new league year starts. At the very start of the new league year on Wednesday, that's when the deadline to tender RFAs, restricted free agents, is. You can slap a restricted free agent with a first round tender, a second round tender, an original round tender, or a right of first refusal tender. This process works similarly to the franchise tag, except that the tender amount is much lower than any of the franchise tag amounts. The tender amounts have been set at about 6 or 7 million for a first round tender, 4.9 million for a second round tender. Original round tender is, I believe, 3.8, 3.9 million. And then the right of first refusal is about $100,000 less than that. So you're dealing with much smaller sums of money in the RFA tender process. You can still negotiate with a player outside of the RFA tender process, but if no deal is reached by the deadline, then you can slap that tender on the player before they hit unrestricted free agency. So in the case of Jauaun Jennings, the 49ers have said that they are trying to reach a long-term deal with him that does not apply to this RFA tender process. They're trying to subvert the process. They're trying to find a long-term deal. But if they cannot reach a deal by next Wednesday, and they do not want Jauaun Jennings to hit the open market, then they can actually tell Jauaun Jennings that they're placing the restricted free agent, the RFA tag on him, not a franchise tag, the RFA tender on him. Shouldn't call it a tag. That's going to confuse people. They can apply the tender to Jauaun Jennings, and then he can go negotiate with other teams. But if another team outbids the 49ers and the 49ers do not want to match, that team would owe the 49ers whatever level of tender the 49ers put on Jauaun Jennings. So say that they put a first-round tender on Jauaun, that means they'd be willing to pay up to, I think it's $6.9 million for the one season. If another team offers more money and the 49ers don't want to match, that team would have to send the 49ers a first-round pick to sign Jauaun Jennings. If they put the second-round tender on Jauaun Jennings next week and another team offers the 49ers more and San Francisco doesn't want to match, well, then San Francisco will pick up a second-round pick. Original round tender, San Francisco would pick up a seventh-round pick because that's where Jauaun Jennings was drafted. Or they can put the right of first refusal tender on Jauaun Jennings that would not bring any sort of draft compensation. It'd be like the transition tag, except much cheaper. And that would allow the 49ers to match a higher offer or to decide to let Jauaun Jennings walk. To me, it seems that the most likely scenario for Jauaun Jennings is the second round tender if the 49ers cannot reach an agreement with him before then. Last year, Colton McKivitz was scheduled to be an restricted free agent. The 49ers bypassed that process by giving him a 2-year deal instead. So they can do something similar with Jauaun Jennings this year. They can give him a longer-term contract, give him a little bit more security, and also lower their cap charge by pushing some of the salary cap damage backwards. So both sides are incentivized to bypass this process. But if Jauaun Jennings thinks that he's worth a lot more than what the 49ers are offering, if these two sides aren't seeing eye to eye by next Wednesday, then the 49ers can run a little bit more of a strong arm situation where they slap that tender on Jauaun Jennings, and then we see where it goes from there. He gets to test the open market, but the 49ers have a right of first refusal. And they also will potentially have the insurance of knowing that a draft pick will come back as compensation in case somebody else does offer more than they're willing to pay for Jauaun Jennings. So it's a little bit complicated, but that's what restricted free agency is. In many ways, the franchise tags, which were applied today to these players, that's like a restricted free agency. You prevent these players right here who are listed from going on the open market. They can talk to other teams, but all of these teams that have applied franchise tags have rights of first refusal on contracts, and 2 first-round picks for any of these guys, that would be a steep price to pay. So you could see why it is more likely than not that Josh Allen, Brian Burns, T. Higgins, Jalen Johnson, Justin Matabuki, Michael Pittman, L'Jarius Sneed, and Antoine Winfield stay with their current teams. So much more miniature version of this will happen in restricted free agency next week, unless the 49ers can find a way to bypass that process with Jauaun Jennings. So that's the update on 49ers franchise tag deadline day. Of course, we're going to talk about Brandon Aiyuk today because Mike Evans has signed his contract with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Evans is older than Brandon Aiyuk. He's on the wrong side of 30. It's only a 2-year deal. But there are a lot of interesting things about the Mike Evans deal that I think can potentially impact where we see Brandon Aiyuk's new contract wind up. The market for wide receivers right now is wide open. Tyreek Hill's at the top of it at $30 million per year, but you'll hear a lot of agents say that's funny money at the end of the year because they don't think he's going to play the last couple of years of that contract on a $45 million base salary. So they think that was artificially inflated. But you've got other guys like A.J. Brown at $25 million per year. And Mike Evans signed a deal that was initially reported yesterday as 2 years, $52 million, which adds up to $26 million per year. But today it came out that the base value of the deal is actually only 2 years, $41 million, which comes out to $20.5 million per year. So what's the truth? Is it worth $20.5 million or is it worth $26 million per year? Mike Florio of Pro Football Talk was creating a bit of a stink about this. He was accusing the national reporters who put out the $26 million number yesterday of listening to agents without questioning them. And he said once the actual details came out, he said that this deal's not worth nearly as much as those initial reports. Well, we have a look under the hood now so we can actually determine who's right. And this applies to the Brandon Aiyuk situation. Aaron Wilson, who's based out in Houston, has some of the details, and I can explain them here. $52 million max, which is $26 million per year. He says 80% of that base value is guaranteed, and obviously the base amount per year is that $20.5 million that I talked about. Wilson here reports some of the incentives. One of the incentives is this one right here, a $3 million escalator if Mike Evans hits 70 catches, 1,000 yards, and 10 touchdowns. He hit 70 catches, 1,000 yards, and 10 touchdowns last year. So I think it's a decent bet that Mike Evans can hit that again. And if he does, that's immediately another $3 million on top of his current deal. So divided over 2 years, that becomes a $22 million per year deal for Mike Evans. He can also trigger another $2 million in annual incentives for being ranked in the top 10 in catches, yards, and touchdowns. He wasn't ranked in the top 10 in catches this year, but he was in yards and touchdowns. So I don't know how many of that 2 million he would have triggered this year, but say that he does rank in the top 10 over the next 2 years, it'd be 2 million tacked on in both seasons. So that would be from 22 million to 24 million per year. The rest of the incentives for Mike Evans are based on playoff victories, $500,000 per playoff victory. So that's how you'd get from 24 million to 26. Anyway, my main point is that it seems like the truth is somewhere in the middle. You have one side arguing the agents or the agent saying yesterday and all the national reporters saying 26 million per year. Then you have the other side led by Mike Florio of Pro Football Talk saying that it's only 20.5 million per year. The rest is fluff. I don't think it's that much fluff when the incentives are actually attainable. When Mike Evans has attained some of the incentive language in the contract. I think that you can see this deal ultimately being worth somewhere between $22 and $24 million per year. And that to me is interesting because we can look at the top 10 contracts for wide receivers. I'll open that up on over the cap right now. Deebo Samuel's at $23.9 million per year. And our question is, where is Brandon Aiyuk going to end up in the larger context of all these receivers? So here we go. Here are the full wide receiver contracts. Here's the list for you. We're going to go to average per year. Tyreek Hill, again, there's some funny money there, but he leads the way at $30 million per year. Devontae Adams is at 28. Cooper Kupp is number 3 at 26.7. Mike Evans would have been number 4 at $26 million per year. Technically, though, it's going to be listed here as $20.5 million per year. So it'll be probably right around the top 10, maybe just outside of it. If we look at it, though, for all intents and purposes, is something that's between 23 and 24 million per year, which I think it will be with those incentives. Mike Evans is in the ballpark of DK Metcalf, Stephon Diggs, Deebo Samuel, and Terry McLaurin. So my question is, where is Brandon Aiyuk going to be? And for that, we have to look at some of this data because, I mean, Aiyuk was wildly efficient this year. The Warner House posted this: 58.1% of his targets went for first downs, the highest percent in the last 12 years. That came from True Media. But there's more, and I'll illustrate it through some of these XY charts. This one is the most staggering to me. On the x-axis for Brandon Aiyuk, you're going to have raw PFF separation grade, so how well somebody separates. Their dot will be further to the right. On the y-axis, you're going to have the grade of how a player performs at the catch point, so how well he holds onto the football and how well he delivers after the catch. So the goal is obviously to be further to the right and further up. You have every single high-volume receiver in football on this XY graph. And this is where you have Brandon Aiyuk at the very, very top. I mean, this is just staggering efficiency, so much that I have a text title for it. Insane efficiency from Brandon Aiyuk. So take a look at that. Then take a look at this right here, and you will see that Brandon Aiyuk probably deserves amongst the top few names on this list. The one argument that people might use against Brandon Aiyuk is that, well, he didn't have as many catches as some of the truly high volume guys in the league. But his yardage was right up there, and his yards per catch was right up there as well. I mean, his yards per catch blew everybody's away. And here he's blowing everybody away in actual efficiency stats and grades. So separation grade and yak grade. So in grades, he's blowing people away. And then we have another screenshot that I don't have it currently with me right here, but I'll open it in a second. I showed it in the previous show. We have another screenshot of Brandon Aiyuk leading in separation and also in another yak metric. So he finds himself in the top right of these graphs, and he finds himself to be an outlier so many times that I look at something like this and I say, geez, this guy, I mean, you have Deebo Samuel, who's also good in terms of yak. I mean, he's the best yak receiver we might have ever seen. Deebo Samuel's a special breed of receiver for the 49ers, but he's also a very different kind of receiver than Brandon Aiyuk, who does the separation stuff a whole lot better. You look at this and you almost assume that Brandon Aiyuk is going to have to check in higher than Deebo Samuel. Now, the 49ers do have real leverage here because Brandon Aiyuk was a first-round pick. So they have the fifth-year option already under contract for this season. They have the franchise tag in their back pocket for the year after that, and potentially even for the year after that, which would be 120% of the first franchise tag. So theoretically, if the 49ers really want to, they could keep Brandon Aiyuk under contract for the next 3 years with them without exercising a new deal with him. They can run the fifth-year option, which they've already obviously exercised. That was last year, and that's what he's under contract for now. They can slap the franchise tag on him next year. They could do it again the year after that. Nobody wants it to reach that point, but if the 49ers feel that this kind of efficiency from Brandon Aiyuk is completely irreplaceable, that, I mean, this guy is so good and they can't reach a fair deal with him. They're not willing to pay him what he thinks he's worth based on what he is doing from an efficiency standpoint. That's a recourse the 49ers can take. That typically will drag negotiations down for Brandon Aiyuk. It will bring the price into a ballpark estimation range for the 49ers because they can tell him, hey, this is your value over the next 3 years if we use 2 franchise tags on you. So this is what the upper limit's going to be. Let's negotiate within those parameters. So that's what's going to be really interesting. Ian Rappaport did report that negotiations are expected to begin after free agency starts. So you would think, so the 49ers have all their options and all the leverage on the table. They want to at least start talking about this in earnest before the NFL draft. Because if there is a trade, if the 49ers say, wait, this is not going to work, and we are offered a king's ransom for Brandon Aiyuk, something that can make our team better for this next season, they're going to want to consummate that trade before the draft so they can have the draft picks to go out and get new players this year. Because the 49ers are not in the business of getting worse this year. They want to make sure that they get better because they're in win now mode. That's why they would have to be absolutely blown away to move off of Brandon Aiyuk, because it's very hard to envision the 49ers being better this next year without this guy right here. It's very, very hard. I would say it's impossible to envision a receiver, a rookie guy, or anybody else in the league plugging and playing into the 49ers system with this kind of efficiency. And if teams start playing a lot more man coverage against the 49ers, and they're going to need to beat man coverage to beat the Chiefs, well, you better have somebody that can beat man coverage. And Brandon Aiyuk did show over the course of the season that he can consistently beat man coverage. So he's going to be worth a lot of money to the 49ers. Expect this contract to be a really big one. I could see it being anywhere. I think it's going to definitely be above Deebo Samuel's. And I think that since Tyreek Hill's deal has some funny money attached to it, I don't think he's going to have to reach 30 million, but I could see anything between 24 and 28 million per year for Brandon Aiyuk, which is obviously a wide range. I have to do the franchise tag or the potential franchise tag calculations to give you a more exact estimate, because then I have a sight at the 49ers leverage in this case. But I think that in the case of Brandon Aiyuk, they will have to pay him a lot of money. But John Lynch has a good relationship with Brandon Aiyuk's agent. The 49ers obviously see the efficiency. I think a lot of this too, it's important to emphasize that football is a team sport. And to get a guy to be this big of an outlier, you've got to have the quarterback and you've got to have the play caller also doing their jobs. Obviously, Aiyuk did an insanely good job, and PFF grading is trying to isolate the receiver from the other variables as much as possible. But we know that football is inherently an intertwined process. And part of that intertwined process means that the coach has got to be calling the right plays and the quarterback's got to be delivering the ball to make his guy look good, to build his confidence, to have something turn into a snowball effect that ends up with him being in the upper right here. So that being said, Aiyuk has a really good rapport with Brock Purdy. He obviously has got a good rapport with Kyle Shanahan. This does not even get into how well he blocks in the run game. I think that the last thing the 49ers would want to do in such a pivotal year for Brock Purdy's big transition, right, from rookie QB deal to potentially big money center of the franchise QB in 2025, one of the last things you'd want to do is take away the receiver with whom he might have his best rapport. I mean, this production right here does speak for itself. And I think that this is so important to the 49ers on so many levels that they truly, truly would have to be blown away by an alternative to go in a different direction. So anyway, I'll take a few questions about this. I know it's complicated stuff with some of these franchise tag numbers, but I thought today was a good time to talk about it. I thought today was a good time to illustrate just how good Brandon Aiyuk has been. The 49ers are in a little bit of a tight spot, obviously, but that's why I made my roster builder for you. And those of you who haven't seen the roster builder yet, I'll toss this again into the description. It's all over my Twitter today. You can actually go out and build your 49ers roster. I have to make a copy of this right here. So look how many people are working on it right now. We've got like 8 people working on building their own 49ers roster here. So I don't want to mess with their spreadsheet. So I'll go ahead and make a copy. We'll open up a new one. And we can give Brandon Aiyuk an extension within the roster. Look how much cap room we have. We have 19 million. If we give him an extension, it would actually lower his cap number for this 2024 season down to about 8 million. That's an estimate on my part. And it would actually raise the 49ers spending limit here because they would have about $25 million in cap space. So it is beneficial in the short term for the 49ers financially to keep Brandon Aiyuk. And I think that it's beneficial in the 49ers in the short term to keep Brandon Aiyuk on the football field as well. Both financially and football-wise, it's a good thing for San Francisco. So just keep all of this in mind as the next few weeks pass by. Obviously, free agency comes first. We'll get a better idea of the 49ers spending habits and what they plan to do as far as bringing in players from outside the building. And then after that, according to Ian Rappaport, they're going to start in earnest with some of these Brandon Aiyuk talks. And the preference, the logical move is definitely to keep this guy around. But I'm just pointing out that it's probably going to cost them some money because he has been really, really impressive for the 49ers over the course of the past 2 years. All right, quick 49ers Q&A. What's everybody up to? Oh, by the way, the people that want a link to the Build Your Roster, here you go. I could put it back into the description, but you can access it through The Athletic. Oh, look who it is. Speaking of the man himself, Brandon Aiyuk, he's right there with John Lynch, Kyle Shanahan, and George Kittle. So this is where you can build your roster for the 49ers. I'm copying and pasting this. I'm going to go ahead and put it into the comment section right now. It's in the comment section. I've superimposed it underneath me, and now I could look through some questions. And Mike added it in there. Thank you. Mike's made his roster. I need to look at his, but you can go and check out Mike's roster. You could tweet your rosters at me. That's what people end up doing. And I could look at your teams. And tomorrow I'm going to release my version of the 49ers roster. So we'll see how I built my roster, and we'll see if it compares to how you guys built yours. J49 loves the Google Sheet setup. Thank you. You can't bring in Mike Evans. Mike Evans just signed a deal with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We had to take him off of our free agency list. He re-signed with the Bucs. You know, on one front, I agree with this. You can stop calling it win now with the 49ers because Lynch has done a great job building sustainability. That being said, these guys aren't going to be playing forever. You know, guys like George Kittle, like guys like Deebo Samuel, physical football players, Eric Armstead. I mean, you see kind of the mortality of their careers when some of these injuries start happening. So if you want to see this particular core of 49ers win, I think it damn well is a win now situation. One of the keys for the 49ers is the fact that Brock Purdy is making only $1 million on the cap this season. Indeed. I can't believe somebody said the 49ers are overpaying him. I don't think there'll be a press conference for the new defensive coordinator since it's an internal hire until the 49ers gather for some kind of practice at OTAs. I would think at OTAs we'll get the first interview with Nick Sorensen. I don't think you could ever be disappointed if a team drafts a running back. Guys, you can't look at NFL talent as something without a drain where water's leaking. You constantly have to be infusing new talent into the pipeline. The 49ers have 11 picks. It would not surprise me at all. And I don't think anybody should be disappointed if they draft a running back. You constantly will be churning on the front, especially at some of the most violent positions in the sport. Gregis does not believe in watching highlights to scout players. Yeah, I do think it is important to be a little bit of a surface level. Let's put it that. Be a little more deep than that. All right. Hopefully, I answered some of your questions about Brandon Aiyuk. Why don't you go build your own rosters? Tweet them at me. Whatever you want to do. We'll feature some of them at some point if I like some of the rosters. But I've given you enough leeway to have some fun here. Build your own 49ers roster. I think it's a good time to be interactive before free agency gets rolling. Everybody, thanks for watching. We'll talk to you very soon.